Hello stalkers. In this video I will give you my point of view on some big changes that the game Stay Out has had throughout my journey playing the game. Just as I will talk a little about the game development phases, but not all of them, because if you are interested in the subject, you can look for information in a source that you consider safe and reliable. And address some applicable methodologies that help maintain a healthy and cohesive project. So let's move on to the game's release date on Steam, November 27, 2019. Almost a month later, the Stay Out team was already performing maintenance on its servers. On December 5, 2019. Which, from my point of view, shows the game was being well accepted by the public, so it was necessary to make adjustments to the servers. Maintenance is part of a game's maturation process. After its release, it is necessary to keep the game flowing smoothly and healthily. Well, I must inform you that I will not go through all the changes that the game has had over the years, but the changes that I have witnessed in my journey playing the game. And since I started playing on June 22, 2022, I will go to the update on September 16, 2022. Which brought the skill tree that many of you use today, and the revamp to the Lübecke's Outlands map. This update also brought new missions and reworked some, as well as the relocation of many non-playable characters, most notably Immerek, the bandit faction, and scientists. Plus, the addition of weapon degradation status. At this point I saw many players abandon the game, especially those who like to play alone. At that moment I saw this update with good eyes because it enriched the game, as well as those that would come. On November 28, 2023, another significant update took place for the game, and this time the map that was reworked was Vesuvius. And again we had new quests and relocation of non-playable characters. Once again I accepted the update as a very positive point for the game and for the players, however, it was starting to get boring to redo some quests. And from this point on I began to understand the players who had abandoned the game in the last big update. And of the many players who had left the game aside, I saw only a very insignificant number return to play. However, it may be that many others returned with other names, but that is just speculation. Now, back to the game development phases. The third phase, after launch, is community interaction, that is, interacting with players through communication channels like forums, Discord, and other means. But for this communication to bear fruit and for the project to not deviate from the original design, developers need to follow a well-defined methodology, or they will lose focus and end up rebuilding the entire game. In some cases, when you lose focus, it's even possible to kill the project without realizing it, because you've taken another direction after the game's release. Almost a year has passed since the last major update, where the Vesuvius map was redesigned. So on December 17, 2024, it was the game's initial map's turn to receive updates. In fact, the map was rebuilt, as were the quests, and new non-playable characters were added. At this point, it became very clear that the developers' interaction with the community was working, as the abandoned warehouse map was previously somewhat chaotic and beginner players did not understand the game's mechanics, as well as the quests presented on the map. Here, it's worth reminding players who are part of the community that the process of developers interacting with players is nothing more than a common process. In other words, this interaction doesn't make you special. In fact, developers need to be vigilant so as not to be sabotaged by the community. Many times, players have brilliant ideas, which, if not carefully studied, can end up contributing to the death of the game, rather than its evolution. If the game's story is not well constructed, and does not follow a harmonious methodology related to the story of the non-playable characters, a simple error in the process leads to the downfall of everything that was built up to that moment. Well, I will present the development phases of a game and some applicable methodologies, after talking about the update of July 15, 2025, current year. In this update, the map that was practically reworked was Lübeck, where one faction ceases to exist, and another takes over its role. Readjusting colors on the map, non-playable characters, reformulating the game's history as a result of a redesign, where players will have to do quests is no longer a healthy update in my point of view. And everything indicates that this is an adaptation due to new elements in new maps, where there was no strategic planning in the initial construction of the game for the new maps and NPCs. I really hope the developers are very careful, because making a mistake now could cost them the end of the game. Personally, I see all these updates positively. However, many players get tired of redoing tasks. In a practical analogy, it's as if you're at your job and have already done everything and more, and at the end of the day your boss comes to you and says you need to stay late to redo everything because he's decided to add a new process to your workday that will simplify his work later on. In other words, you pay the price for poorly designed planning, to justify the ease of someone else's work in another department. But here, there's a perspective that needs to be both qualitative and quantitative. That is, if the number of players who quit is significantly lower than the number of satisfied players, then the process can be considered successful overall. Finally, we'll look at the phases of game development, the main activities of the post-launch phase, and how the evolutionary history happens, plus the SMART methodology. Game development, whether for consoles, PCs, or mobile devices, typically follows a cycle with several distinct phases. These phases are crucial to ensuring the final product is high quality and meets player expectations. The main phases of game development are: idealization. This initial stage involves brainstorming and developing the core game idea. Defining the game's purpose, genre, and target audience, exploring core mechanics and story. Note that it is clear here that the story of Stay Out reached a certain part of the Black Forest map, since there was a faction reformulation and the addition of new NPCs in Lubeck. Pre-production. This is the planning and design phase where the game's foundation is laid. Creating a detailed game design document, GDD, market research, prototyping to test core concepts, and making key design decisions. At this point in the process, the team adopts a methodology to link the environments, the characters, the story, and the number of maps, if more than one is needed, but also the total limit of the game and its updates, which is reviewed in the 7th phase. Production. The longest phase, where the game is built. Coding the game, creating all game assets, art, sound, music, designing levels, implementing mechanics, and integrating different features. Testing. After production, the game enters the polishing and testing phase. This includes internal testing, beta testing with players, bug fixes, and fine-tuning the gameplay and user experience. Optimizing the game for different platforms and devices is also crucial during this phase. Pre-launch is the period before a game is released to the public, encompassing all activities to prepare the game for the market. Launch. The release of the game to the public on the chosen platforms. Marketing and promotion to generate buzz and ensure wider visibility for the game. Maintenance. Providing maintenance, releasing patches to fix issues, and potentially developing additional content or updates to keep players engaged. At this stage, the team must follow the methodology strictly to avoid losing control of the game. After a game's launch, the post-launch phase is crucial to ensuring its longevity and success. This phase involves maintaining, supporting, and updating the game, as well as interacting with the player community. Main activities of the post-launch phase. Bug and issue fixes. Adding content. Community interaction. It is necessary to be careful with the community's opinion notes, as some ideas may seem good, but if they are not analyzed carefully, these ideas and opinions can bring down the project, by putting it in a different direction than what was agreed upon in the story as a whole. Performance optimization. Data analysis. Here statistics and feedback will be analyzed, but not before defining the research objective and choosing the appropriate analysis tools. Planning future updates. All these phases are important and deserve attention and care, but extra care should be taken in the planning phase for future updates. In MMORPGs, a character's evolutionary story is built through interaction with the virtual world and other players. The player creates a unique character and develops them over time by making decisions, completing quests, and interacting with the environment and other characters. This interaction shapes the character's story, allowing them to evolve and transform throughout their journey in the game. How evolutionary history happens. Interaction with the world. Decision-making. Level progression and skills. Relationship building. Achievements and challenges. For all these phases of game development to be successful, you need to follow a methodology, right? And one of the methodologies that can be adopted is SMART objectives. Okay, what is a SMART objective in a project? SMART is a method that ensures objectives are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. There are other auxiliary processes, but I'll leave them to those curious to delve deeper into the challenging world of game creation and development. I conclude these steps with game versioning. Versions of a game can vary, but they generally refer to different stages of development or specific editions of the game. The most common versions include prototypes, alpha, beta, open and closed, RC, and final versions, as well as special editions such as Deluxe, Gold, or Game of the Year. Maintaining a free game for so long with a small team isn't easy. However, without strategic control over the project, the team could end up killing the game by adjusting its evolutionary history. I sincerely hope the developers are paying close attention, because Stay Out, in my opinion, is a very good game, but it deserves to add content to new maps, not rebuild the story of already completed maps just to justify new non-playable characters in more recent maps. Finally, I say that in my case, it's no longer viable to support the game by recreating content from tasks that have already been completed, as there will be no end to it. I have other projects, such as creating 2 modified maps for DayZ, and developing my own game. I'm grateful for everyone's support, but in life we make choices, and just as the Stay Out developers chose to rebuild their game's story, I won't be able to follow along, as it seems like a crazy process. And between continuing with content that requires me to redo tasks every 6 months at least and creating something new, I'll stick with the new, even if I lose the support of some of you at first. But I hope you guys continue to support the channel, even if the focus now is on the modified map. Oh yeah, in the description of this video you will find material about game design and intelligent interaction, game development patterns and best practices, a guide to the project management body of knowledge. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment and share.